Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Mindful Empath. My name is Michael Evans. You are listening to a podcast dedicated to discussing the intersection between mindfulness and understanding this inherent human superpower called empathy. Now, if you've been following along, this podcast has a couple of lives in the last handful of years. Back in 2019, it began as Empathy and, with the idea that I was kind of digging into both the science and spirituality of empathy, and it was intended to be a conversational podcast. For a number of different reasons, it didn't really come to fruition like that. I had a handful of interviews, but not very many. And we were also going through, oh man, a global time of turmoil. And let's be honest, it really hasn't stopped now, has it? Now, over time, I also became to understand that there was and is a large contingency of folks that were completely fatigued at this idea of putting empathy on a pedestal. Um, and I want to acknowledge and recognize that there is a very challenging, hard, shadow, potentially even dark side to empathy. Many of us are what you might consider highly sensitive people. Now, from a clinical perspective, there's an actual clinical definition of a highly sensitive person that just means somebody who processes sensory information. It is physiological more deeply and intensely than an average person. And this can lead them to feel overwhelmed by external stimuli like bright lights, loud noises, and they also experience a greater depth of emotion and empathy. We feel everything all the time. And for many of us, empathy is an albatross, not a gift or an award or or a superpower for that matter. You might know someone like that. You might be someone like that. And let's be honest, there are still things happening in this world that are incredibly overwhelming. We live in a very divisive time. Politics, the effects and after effects of global pandemic, the continued rise of social media being this invasive, manipulative marketing tool, the militarization is what I meant to say of mass media. It all affects our sensibility around this idea of empathy. Now, personally, I think that many of these challenges have created that fatigue around the idea of empathy. And it is a balance. Let's be honest. It is a balance between knowing that it is an imperative and knowing that for many of us, kindness, like I said in the earlier episode, kind of teasing this, kindness is the new punk rock, but also being protective of our own energy. And it's also navigating that gray area of looking at what's happening around us and understanding what's contrived and curated outrage for outrage's sake and what is real. I think we're all kind of facing that question on a daily basis. Now, during the pandemic, I spent quite a bit of time learning about the benefits of mindfulness, recognizing the way that my approach to this idea of empathy might need a little bit of tweaking. At one point, I think I needed Honestly, I really do feel like I needed to convince people of this inherent energy, this inherent power, this inherent skill, the fact that it's hardwired. And maybe in retrospect, I feel like I now don't think that I needed to convince anyone of that issue. And so this new iteration of the mindful empath is now leaning into this fulcrum, creating a foundation of balance in order to be healthy, relatively happy, emotionally regulated, and yet still be an empathic person. Because the truth is, we are all empaths to one degree or another. We exist on this spectrum of sensitivity. Okay, let's make this really practical. We've all been there. A wave of frustration washes over you, a surge of joy makes you want to dance, a knot of anxiety tightens in your stomach. You walk into an environment. It could be a concert, a sporting arena, a classroom where emotions are charged already and you get caught up in it. Emotions and feelings are powerful things, sometimes overwhelming and oftentimes confusing. Today we're going to explore what happens when we bring a different kind of tool perspective to this experience, and that is mindfulness. But let's get some definition kind of work out of way. Let's work on our collective glossary here. When most people hear the word mindfulness, they immediately think of some cross-legged, eyes closed, trying to clear mind, some sort of monk activity, very ascetic. Um, and that might be a part of it, but that's a bit like saying a car is just the engine. It is so much more than that. Mindfulness at its core is the simple act of paying attention, intentional awareness, intentionally bringing your awareness to the present moment without judgment. It's not about emptying your mind, but rather observing what's already there, the thoughts, the sounds, the sensations in your body, and doing so with a gentle, curious, and open attitude. Again, without judgment. Think of it like this, like your mind is a river, and your thoughts and feelings are the things floating down that river. Normally, we get caught up in those things, a log of worry, a branch of anger, the rocks of turmoil and anxiety, and we ride it or feel it all the way downstream. Mindfulness is about stepping onto the riverbank, sitting down, watching all of those things float by. You're not trying to stop the river, you're just changing your relationship to it. You're adjusting your posture towards it. Mindfulness isn't just a formal practice that you do for 10 minutes a day, it's a way of being. It's about being fully present while you wash the dishes. It's about feeling the warmth of the water on your hands. It's about truly tasting your coffee or that bite of cobbler. It's a lens through which you can view all of life, including the most turbulent and beautiful parts of it. It is a posture towards life. And what are those turbulent and beautiful parts? Well, we experience those through this idea of emotions and feelings. Emotions are incredibly powerful and by and large instinctual. They drive us to accomplish amazing feats, connect us deeply to others, and they give our lives color and meaning. We are not robots. We are not automatons. We are a sentient people, sentient being feeling. And unfortunately, sometimes our emotions can also feel like this force of nature that is outside of our control. Now, why is that? Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. Emotions are instinctual, they are signals. Fear is a signal that there's danger, anger is a signal that there is a boundary that might have been crossed. Joy is a signal that something good is happening to you. These signals evolved to be powerful and fast. They're designed to grab your attention and often trigger an immediate response. This is the part of the lizard brain that is um, uh, flee, fight, fawn, freeze, right? It's the way our body tells us that something is important. And yet, we now live in a modern world where we are beyond the cave. We are beyond, for the most part, a moment in time in which we recognize that there is very real physical danger around the corner. Now, I'm not trying to minimize the fact that there are still those moments of realization and emotion and instinctual um, freeze, fawn, fight, flight, right? I get it. I'm not trying to minimize that at all. Yet, these ancient signals, these instinctual impulses can sometimes get a little crossed. We might feel the same surge of anxiety from an email from our boss or a friend that back when we were in caves, we might have had that same sense of anxiety when being chased by a predator. We might feel the same flash of anger at a traffic jam as we would at true, real injustice. Our emotional systems are powerful, but sometimes they overfire. When we soak our brain in constant fight or flight, everything ends up becoming a danger. And this is where the mindful practice of practicing the pause becomes so incredibly important. We feel intense energy, the physical sensation, a racing heart, a clenched jaw, that knot in our stomach, and we don't always understand why. We might try to suppress that emotion, to push it down, hoping it will go away. We try to rationalize it. We try to think our way out of it. But as anyone who has ever tried the whole just be happy knows, it doesn't work that way. Our emotions aren't logical, they are lived experiences. And when we try to fight them, we often just make them stronger. That cliche or trope or whatever it might be, what we resist persists. So we have this situation, a powerful, often confusing inner experience, and our usual strategies of fighting or ignoring it often backfire. So again, what's the alternative? This does bring us to the premise of the mindful empath and what we are going to be doing on this podcast going forward. We're bringing mindful awareness to our emotional experience. This is not about getting rid of emotions. It's not about becoming some sort of stoic robot who never feels anything. In fact, it is the opposite. It's about learning to be fully present with our emotions, to feel them completely without being swept away by them. In Buddhism, and we might talk about this in further episodes, but in Buddhism, they talk about non attachment, and oftentimes that gets confused with detachment. Detachment can often come across as being aloof, as not caring, as not wanting to interact with the world. Non attachment says, I can be here fully. I can understand what is happening in front of me. I can do my best and be my best in that moment without necessarily attaching myself to any particular outcome of that experience. It's nuanced, but it's powerful. So I'm going to give you something very practical during this episode today before we wrap up. It's a very quick 3-step process that you can apply anytime, anywhere when you notice an emotion or feeling arise. Now, the first thing is when you experience something, you acknowledge and you name it. We allow ourselves to go kind of mentally blah when we're having extreme emotions, and we often say, I don't know why I am feeling this thing. We just need to turn that introspective and magnifying glass inward and take a mindful pause to see if we can acknowledge and name it. You take a breath. You simply say to yourself, there's anger, or I'm feeling anxious right now, or this is sadness. Don't analyze it. You don't need to figure out why. You're just giving it a name. That simple act creates a little bit of a space, that pause between you and the emotion. It's the difference between being a passenger on a runaway train and standing on the platform watching it speed by. The train is still there. You're just not on it. So acknowledge and name. That's step one. Step two, locate and feel. Now, this is the one that actually takes practice. And this is the reason why when I talk about mindfulness coaching, that it is nice to do this alongside someone who has had some experience in guiding people through this activity. Because emotions aren't just abstract ideas in your head, they have a physical signature. Studies have shown that emotions actually live within our bodies physiologically for approximately 90 seconds. That tightness in the chest when we are anger, or that embarrassment that we might feel deep in our belly. If you feel heat in your face, that could be anger, that could be shame. There's a lot of different ways in order to identify that. But when we sit with that physiological experience, we can then start to understand how a feeling or emotion affects us specifically, right? And it's not about judging it good or bad. Allow yourself to be your own scientist. Your body is the laboratory. You're observing the experiment and the data. Maybe you notice the sensation has a certain shape or temperature. Just be with it, allowing it to be there just as it is. And when we move forward, we might not get fully into it today, but when we move forward, when you start to understand how a particular emotion feels in your body, it becomes so much easier to discern when you're in a group of people whether you're feeling that thing or whether it's coming from somebody else. Now, step 3 is practicing that non-judgmental presence. And this is probably the hardest, most crucial step. Our natural inclination is to judge our emotions. We have feelings about our feelings. And the fidelity there starts to lose its power. It starts to get a lot fuzzier when we start having feelings about our feelings, right? I shouldn't be angry about this. I'm so weak for feeling sad or shame or jealousy. And judgment just adds another layer of suffering on top of that original emotion. Instead, can you just let the feeling be there? Can you bring a kind and gentle attitude towards it? One of my favorite concepts within like therapeutic um, modalities is this idea of like parenting yourself. Sometimes we have to look at our emotions like you are a loving parent, and the emotion is a frightened child. You wouldn't scold that child for being afraid, you would just hold them. Similarly, you can hold your emotions with compassion. Now, that entire process might only take a few breaths. You might be in a meeting and notice frustration, and instead of lashing out, you can take a moment. Okay, that's frustration. I feel a clenching in my jaw. It is okay to feel this right now. It's not about suppressing the emotion, it's about allowing it to be present, to let it run through its physiological life cycle without letting it dictate your actions. It's the difference between being anger and observing anger. Another helpful reminder about this for yourself is to shift the language around your emotions from self-identification to non-attached observation. Rather than I am angry or I am frustrated, it can be I can tell that this angers me, or this is what it feels like to be frustrated. My friends, you are not your emotions. And being able to shift the way that you talk to yourself about yourself goes a long way in addressing that. So, finally, why am I doing this? Why bother? What's the payoff? The payoff ultimately is freedom. When you learn to be present with your emotions, you start to see that they are truly temporary. They rise, they peak, they fall. They're like weather systems. You don't get mad at a thunderstorm. You just take shelter and wait for it to pass. By bringing mindful awareness to your emotional experience, you start to see that you are not the storm. You are the space in which the storm appears. This practice builds emotional intelligence, EQ. The more you observe your emotions, the better you understand your own patterns and triggers. You might notice, oh, every time my schedule gets too busy, I feel overwhelmed. This awareness gives you the power to make different choices. You can proactively manage your emotions instead of just reacting to the feeling of being overwhelmed. And it creates and cultivates compassion, not just for yourself, but for others. When you understand that emotions are truly universal, powerful, and often confusing part of the human experience, you can meet others with kindness and less judgment. You know what it feels like. Dr. Paul Ekman, and I know I've talked about him before on this podcast, but Dr. Paul Ekman is a notable psychologist and scientist who did a global research study on what are essentially called micro expressions, meaning the way that we express our emotions um, through our facial expressions are actually pretty universal. Now, depending on the psychologist, you can find a different set of like core emotions. I believe he settled on 6, but he did a cross-cultural global research study looking at the facial expressions of people that were experiencing particular emotions. And the micro expressions that were evident in his studies showed that it did not matter whether you were an Aboriginal tribesman in New Zealand or a middle-aged stockbroker in New York, that when you expressed or when you experienced fear, it shows up in your face in approximately the same manner. Why do I mention this? Is because this is the very kind of foundation scientifically that we get to how we can empathize, how we can truly understand what somebody might be feeling in a nanosecond. Because we recognize that expression of anger, of shame, of sadness. And we connect that to our own experience, our own feeling, and say, I know what that feeling is. When I first began this work, the first iteration of the podcast back in 2019, one of my huge influences was the work and person of Brene Brown. In her 2010 TED Talk, which I checked it today, at this moment has been watched more than 68 million times. It's a top 10 presentation. In that TED Talk, she talked about the power of vulnerability and talked quite extensively on empathy, about what it means to connect with humans, what it means to belong, what it means to love. And she lays out quite a compelling argument, I guess you could say, about empathy based on her research. She is in large part why I even started this in the first place. She's also a wonderful example of someone who is constantly learning and willing to amend her work based on new findings and understandings and what's going on in the world around us. Early on, she emphasized, much like I did, the way in which we as humans experience empathy not only as an act of vulnerability, but as a part of like this hardwired human experience. Fundamentally, empathy is understanding, and as a human being, we may know what it means to experience shame, so we can tap into that moment to empathize with someone who might be feeling that same emotion. But what she didn't, I'm not sure that she didn't understand it, but in her early work, she often didn't really express something that she later addressed. And that is that affective, emotional empathy, by understanding, oh, they might be experiencing shame in this moment, and I know what shame feels like, is only part of the equation when it comes to a beautiful, kind, connective, empathic response. Empathy is a manner of understanding, and yet it requires us to believe people's stories. It's not just that that i- immediate connection of understanding what the feeling is. If I attempt to connect with somebody in an empathic exchange without truly listening and understanding their story, it can actually become pretty shallow, very cursory. It's a little bit of a meaningless victory. In her book, which was the source for that TED Talk called The Gifts of Imperfection, she puts it this way. She says, I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. When they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. The way in which we value others most is by listening to them. My experience as a middle-aged white man is not the same at all with somebody who's experienced racism. I can say that I understand what it means to be judged. What I cannot understand, because it is not my lived reality, is what it means to be judged and experienced like the true horrors of racism. The reason why this matters so much is that the act of listening to people and believing them is absolutely part of the calculus of connection and the formula of empathy. We listen to people's stories here, and we do so not to merely earn some gold star, but because people matters. Everyone matters. And to quote one of my favorite fictional detectives, Harry Bosch, shout out to Michael Connelly, everybody counts or nobody counts. So I invite you this week, the next time you feel a strong emotion, your own, whether it's a difficult one like irritation or a wonderful one like excitement, just pause. Just pause. Name it. Locate it in your body and just be with it for a moment without judgment. And if someone seeks you out for connection, stop, listen, and believe, and see what happens. Thanks again for joining me on this first episode of The Mindful Empath. If you are interested in supporting me in this work, please, please, please find me at mindfulempath.substack.com. You can become a free subscriber and get access to the podcast and other writings. And if you want to help me out, keep the lights on and a roof over my head, you can become a paid subscriber. We will see you next time. And until then, be well and be mindful.